Do you remember Nick Arcade? No relation to the game show from the early 90s. The Nick Arcade was a storefront for slightly above browser quality Flash and Shockwave games that Nickelodeon expected you to pay money for, usually in the form of a subscription service. So it's like, imagine Steam, but if it worked like Netflix, and all of the games kinda sucked. That was the Nick Arcade. It was a pretty big deal for kids like me in the mid to late 2000s. I used to play the free trials for some of the games all the time. My mom was too scared of subscription services to ever let me actually buy any of these games though, so when the 30-minute free trial was up, that was it for me. The feeling of my SpongeBob game closing while I'm in the middle of a level is indescribable. A feeling of dread that has so far not been matched. Nowadays, almost all of these games are available for free on archive.org or My Abandonware. The Nick Arcade was shut down sometime in late 2011, with Shockwave Games, the company that powered the whole thing, moving all the Nick games over to their website for a while before they went all in on simple puzzle games for old people. But for a while before that, things were good. We had great games like Timmy's Roach Rampage, SpongeBob Game of Life, Fishdom. Well, some of these games weren't as good as others, but there were still a select few worth looking back on. In retrospect, it seems obvious that Nickelodeon would put the most resources into making sure their SpongeBob games were at least enjoyable. He also seems to have the most games out of any series, and for the most part, these are the ones I remember playing. The crowning jewel of this catalog being the subject of today's video, the SpongeBob Obstacle Odyssey games. The first Obstacle Odyssey game was released in January 2005, exclusively for the Nick Arcade. The description on the site reads as follows. Dive into this 3D undersea adventure starring the sea bottom's most absorbent sponge.
That's it?
Well, at least we have these game features to go through. Challenging gameplay, and 72 baffling boards to choose from. All for the low price of $20 fucking dollars!
SpongeBob betrayed us!
Haha, sorry. That was probably an overreaction. Maybe this first Obstacle Odyssey game was worth the $20. It's not really. Obstacle Odyssey is a platformer in the most basic sense. Very, very simple. It's a lot like Monkey Ball, except the gimmick of the ball is gone, so you're just left with SpongeBob. Your only options are move and jump, and you can either play with the arrow keys and spacebar, or you can have SpongeBob follow the cursor, and have him jump by clicking. I played through 99% of the game with the keyboard controls, but there were a few levels I found easier with the mouse controls, which I'll get to later. Every level starts with SpongeBob and Patrick separated, and your job is to reunite them. No unique gameplay involving this concept though. Like I said, this is very basic platforming. It's not like Ilo Milo or anything. Along the way to Patrick, there are bubbles to collect, which do nothing but increase your high score. Rarely you will also run into clocks that extend the timer and yellow spongy hearts that give you an extra life. Every few levels you're rewarded with a little animation of SpongeBob and one of his friends, and then are treated to a short bonus stage where you play as that same friend and collect as many collectibles as you can before time runs out, also very reminiscent of Monkey Ball's bonus stages. In order to keep you from getting too bored, the game spices things up by splitting into 3 different worlds. These worlds basically serve as background and texture changes, and a slight difficulty increase each time, but other than that, there isn't much difference. The first world is called Bikini Bottom, which it looks nothing like. Sorry, pink, yellow, and green platforms just don't scream Bikini Bottom to me. Bikini Bottom serves as the introductory world. A lot of the levels are pretty easy and are just there to hold your hand while you learn about the interactable objects like bumpers and dash arrows. Of note is this specific level, Board 12, Boxy Beauty, which seems inconspicuous at first, but is secretly the first board in the game that completely restricts you from jumping. It just doesn't tell you until you actually try to jump. The ultimate slap in the face is that Board 21, Boxy Beast, is an exact replica of Boxy Beauty, except this time you can jump, and the board tilts a little bit every once in a blue moon. Hey, remember like a minute ago when I said that sometimes there are levels that play better with mouse controls? Introducing Board 20, Octo Tower. For some reason, in a select few levels, this one included, SpongeBob's controls seem unresponsive. Specifically, it seems like he doesn't want to jump when I tell him to. After fiddling with it for a bit, I think it specifically relates to trying to jump while holding down more than one direction. Here's an example. If I want to go up and to the right and I hold down both those keys and try to jump, SpongeBob just won't do it. This isn't usually an issue, because in most stages the jumps are straight in one direction. But in stages like Octo Tower, where every single jump is diagonal, it gets a little frustrating. However, and I unfortunately discovered this far too late in my playthrough, this issue doesn't exist for mouse controls. SpongeBob can jump all around in any direction he wants with the mouse controls, and it seems to work just fine every time. This, for me, makes Octo Tower one of the most difficult stages in the game, when it really had no right to be. The next world is Jellyfish Fields, and unlike the last world, the visuals in this one faithfully follow its namesake. The sky has some jellyfish floating in it, and the textures on the floors are green and purple, much like the grass and rocks from Jellyfish Fields in the show. Good job, developers! Unfortunately, there's nothing much else to talk about in this world. The difficulty goes up for a bit, and also this board is named Spyro for some reason. Now it's on to the final world, the Blue Abyss. Wait, I'm sorry. That's not a real location in the show, is it? Yeah, I checked, and this is the only SpongeBob media to ever have an area called the Blue Abyss. Who came up with that name? Why not just call it Rock Bottom or something? With the visuals they chose for this world, it definitely could have fit. Maybe they just thought the name sounded cool, in which case I can't entirely blame them because it is sort of cool, but it's also a little menacing. This world increases the difficulty to the max, or at least the max this game is willing to offer, which still isn't that difficult. There were a few levels that gave me a bit of trouble. I think the one I died the most on was Board 6, Bumper Jumper. There are a lot of these levels where they want you to slide on a ramp to get a big jump, but this one is definitely the farthest and tightest jump of all of them. It took me a good few tries. There's also Board 11, Tilt and Whirl, which suffers from the same control issues Octo Tower did in the first world, and unfortunately I still hadn't discovered mouse controls were easier yet. Until I got to Board 21, Diamond Mine, and then I finally figured it out. Woo! Look amigo, guys, hell yeah! And that's it. That's all SpongeBob Obstacle Odyssey has to offer, and that's all I have to say about it. It's pretty short and very simple, but sometimes it's nice just to play a simple platformer. No air dashing or wall jumping, just SpongeBob. Still, I think the highest score I'm feeling on this on my patent-pending Lime Raider is a 2.5 out of 5 limes. Maybe 3 out of 5 limes on a good day. Just because I know better platformers exist out there. Also, this game feels a bit impersonal to SpongeBob. Almost like it could be a completely different game wearing SpongeBob's skin. That's right, 3 years before Obstacle Odyssey came to the Nick Arcade, Retro64, one of the two companies credited on Obstacle Odyssey, released Best Friends, a game where you play as two penguin-like creatures in a very simple platformer. Do these levels look familiar to you? They should, because they are the exact same levels as Obstacle Odyssey. Most levels even have the same name. I'm not mad at them for doing this, because I had fun with SpongeBob, and no one on the planet remembers Best Friends, so without it becoming Obstacle Odyssey, I would have never played it. Obstacle Odyssey is also better because the sound effects in Best Friends can be a little grating after a bit. With the success of Obstacle Odyssey on the Nick Arcade website, Nickelodeon was apt to make a sequel, but would they fare well making an entirely original game? Well, 2 years later, the world was graced with SpongeBob Obstacle Odyssey 2, Time Trouble. The only game I've ever seen spell out the word 2 instead of just using the number for some reason. But was the game any good?
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
The Nick Arcade website says about SpongeBob Obstacle Odyssey 2, travel through time with SpongeBob to foil Plankton's latest scheme to steal a secret Krabby Patty recipe. Race through the beginning of time, past the Middle Ages, and right into the future to bring the Bikini Bottom gang home. 70 plus courses, huh? Why, that's almost as much as the first game. The first thing you'll notice about Obstacle Odyssey 2, and its first pro, is that it has more polish than the first game did. A full title screen with an options menu, the ability to name your profile, a story, a level select screen. The game keeps track of if you caught all of the bubbles in a level or not. Multiple characters, this is all good stuff, and everything I would have wanted out of a sequel to the first game. So where did it go wrong? Well, let's jump into the tutorial and see if we can find out. You'll first notice the improvements in the graphics, mostly the character models. In general, all of them have more polygons. I didn't mind the graphics from the first game, but the new ones are mostly fine. My only real issue is that Patrick's right arm looks like it's broken at the elbow. After you're done gawking at the improvements in SpongeBob's character model, you will be prompted to jump for the first time, and here you will discover one of the game's most blaring issues. The sound design in this game is fucking terrible. Every single sound effect in this game is ear-piercing. Just listen to the sound the game makes when you're about to run out of time in a stage. Listen to the sound it makes every single time Sandy lands from a jump. Thank God you can turn off all the sound effects in the options menu. However, I didn't, because I'm a sadomasochist. As I mentioned earlier, there are new playable characters in this game. You can play as SpongeBob, Sandy, Mr. Krabs, and Patrick. Sandy can double jump, Mr. Krabs can move faster, and Patrick takes less knockback from bumping into the obstacles. SpongeBob is just listed as well-rounded, which in actuality just means he does nothing special and controls like he does in the first game. Sandy's double jump is bizarre. It's like one normal jump and then another jump 3 times the height straight up into the air like a rocket. Patrick is almost completely useless. The obstacles he's good against aren't seen frequently in the game at all. Truth be told, I played as SpongeBob for 99% of my playthrough for a few reasons. Reason number 1 being that you have to unlock all of these characters, and you unlock one each time you beat one of the 3 worlds, meaning whichever world you pick to beat last is useless because you unlock that character the same second you beat the game itself. Reason number 2 is switching characters is extremely tedious. At the beginning of every level is a glowing spot you can stand on to change your character. Simple enough, right? The issue is that it doesn't save the last character you used. No matter what, you start every level as SpongeBob. So if I wanted to play through the whole game as Mr. Krabs, at the start of every single level, I have to spend a couple of seconds selecting Mr. Krabs, just so I can spend roughly the next 30 seconds beating the level, and then do it again. There's no point in bothering anyway because of reason 3. None of the levels are designed for any character other than SpongeBob. The only level in this entire game that requires you to use a character other than SpongeBob is the tutorial, which you don't even have to play because it doesn't count towards your completion percentage at all. SpongeBob can beat every single level and collect every bubble in the game without the help of any other character. The only reason you would ever want to play as another character is if they made a specific section slightly easier. But this game is already significantly easier than the first game, so moments like that are few and far between. Okay, that's enough about the characters. Let's talk about the story. Is it better than Breaking Bad? All of the story in this game is portrayed through these comic book panels, which when you scroll over, light up and display the text for that panel. I think this is a cool way of showing the story. If they didn't want to pay for the voice actors to voice it, I'm glad they found an interesting way of showing the story through text and images only. Plus, it gives you the freedom to read the panels right to left like a manga if you wanted, although it wouldn't make any sense that way. The story itself is pretty simple. Plankton wants to steal the Krabby Patty's secret formula as always, and this time he's invented a battery-powered remote time machine to do it. His plan is to send everyone that would typically stand in his way into the past, and for some reason he decides to try accomplishing this by setting up a trap of free chum, which Patrick runs straight into, leading him and everyone else into a portal to the past. But before SpongeBob falls into the portal, he snatches the remote from Plankton so he can get back to the present after he rescues all of his friends. I know this is a cartoon, so I'll try not to go too hard on this, but Plankton's plan is fucking stupid. It entirely hinges on Patrick being at the Krusty Krab at that moment and everyone for some reason following after him when he goes to get the chum. It would have been simpler and more effective if Plankton just ran up to everyone and zapped them into the past himself. I assume the write-off for Squidward not being in this game is that he wouldn't chase after Patrick under any circumstances, so at least that part is somewhat logically sound. Finally, we've made it to the level select and onto the real meat and potatoes of any game, the gameplay. Unfortunately, this is where Obstacle Odyssey 2 truly falls apart. The physics in this game are just off compared to the first one. For some reason, every time any character jumps, unless you jump straight up on a completely flat surface, when you land, it will make the sliding sound effect for half a second, every single time. On top of that, this game is just generally glitchy. There were multiple times when I was just able to phase through platforms, something that never happened to me in the first game. This game is also significantly easier than the first game. You are now allowed to fall off of the cliff 3 times before they actually restart the level and take a life from you. Most of the levels are straightforward and easy for SpongeBob alone, but if you decide to actually take the time to switch to Sandy, a good portion of these levels can be almost completely skipped. This brings me to Obstacle Odyssey's biggest con, the level design. The level design in this game is downright terrible. I would say 50% of all the levels in this game are copies of levels from the first game, levels that play worse in a bad physics engine. All of the original levels in this game are just terrible. A lot of the early on levels are just, hey, here's a big wide open area. Collect all the bubbles and then touch the goal. And worst of all, there are a lot of levels where they think difficulty equals being patient and waiting. There's so much goddamn waiting in Obstacle Odyssey 2. Here's a level where you wait for an elevator. Here's a level where you wait for moving platforms. Here's another level where you wait for another elevator. Some of these are supposed to be the end game levels, the hardest levels in the game, and they just come out feeling completely creatively bankrupt. Don't get me wrong, I'm not expecting Super Mario Galaxy type level design. I know this is a Shockwave game from the Nick Arcade, but what I wanted and what I expected was level design on par with the original, which ends up being a masterpiece compared to this. When I think of games that involve time travel, I think, oh, maybe I'll be able to activate the remote in the middle of the level to go to the future so I can progress. But no. That's too much for a Shockwave game from the 2000s. The entire purpose of this gimmick was so they could theme the 3 worlds roughly after time periods. No other reason. We have the prehistoric era, the Middle Ages, and the future, or as I like to refer to them, boring, and slightly less boring, but still kind of boring. The levels in the first game looked boring too, sure, but at least they were themed after locations from the show, which is especially impressive because that entire game was a reskin, unlike Obstacle Odyssey 2, which had the chance to make something more SpongeBob-y, but just didn't. After about an hour and 10 minutes of being tortured to death by the sound and level design, you'll finally have reached the end of the main game. We're treated to another story comic where we see Plankton opening the vault to the secret formula before our heroes arrive to the present just in the nick of time to stop him. However, Plankton flees with the formula into a time portal, leading us to play through all of the bonus levels. Yippee! Even more levels. At this point I thought to myself, okay, bonus levels that I could only unlock if I beat the whole rest of the game. Surely these will be levels that require me to use the other characters, right? Nope, these are just more of the same. Some of these bonus levels are also just taken from the first game. Even if the levels were designed to make you use the other characters, it would be useless at this point because the completion bonus for getting all the bubbles in the main story is that SpongeBob is now Super Saiyan, and has all the benefits of all the other characters. This might be the funniest completion bonus I've ever seen, and while it further invalidates the need to play as the other characters, it's also so ridiculous that I couldn't help but smile when I saw it. After we beat the bonus levels, we're treated to the true ending of the game. What the fuck? Just kidding. SpongeBob and gang catch up with Plankton and snatch the formula and his version of the time machine from him. Mr. Krabs tells SpongeBob and Sandy to destroy them so they can no longer be used for evil, but SpongeBob and Sandy instead suggest keeping them because it's funny. Patrick then uses the time machine to go back to the beginning of the game and eat all of the free chum Plankton had laid out as a trap. The end. Part of me wishes I never replayed SpongeBob Obstacle Odyssey 2, or made this video at all. Then I could have lived blissfully with my memories of the past, when me and my brother owned a physical copy of this game and we would take turns playing it. Back then I was a dumb kid who just liked playing SpongeBob games, but now I'm a slightly less dumb adult who still likes to play SpongeBob games, but I know a dumpster fire when I see one now. Nostalgia can't save this game. I can unfortunately give it no higher than 1.5 out of 5 limes. I can at least seek solace knowing that some of the other SpongeBob games I played as a kid are still genuinely fun. Overall, I would recommend checking out the first Obstacle Odyssey if you're a SpongeBob fan bored at home on a Saturday, or if you're interested in these simple little abandonware PC games. It could be a nice time waster. The same can't be said about the second game though. Even for free, this game simply isn't worth your time, especially if you already played the first one. While I now look at SpongeBob Obstacle Odyssey 2 with ire, I still look back fondly on Nick Arcade Shockwave as a whole. For now. Rest in peace, Nick Arcade. Rest in peace.